You want to know how humanity conquered the galaxy in 3 years? Pull up a chair, friend, because I'm about to tell you the most ridiculous war story you've ever heard. And before you start rolling whatever passes for eyes on your species, let me introduce myself. Commander Zek Mortalis, former tactical advisor to the Galactic Defense Coalition, survivor of 43 major space battles, and current professional drunk. That's right, I said former. Because thanks to a bunch of bipedal mammals from a backwater planet called Earth, the Galactic Defense Coalition doesn't exist anymore. Neither does the Zephyrian Empire, the Crystal Dominion of Nexus Prime, or the Hive Confederacy. They're all flying human flags now, and somehow, impossibly, they seem happy about it. Another quantum whiskey fizz, I call out to the bartender, a blob-like creature whose species I've never bothered to learn. This dive bar on Station Omega-7 has become my second home, mainly because it's one of the few places in the galaxy where nobody talks about humanity's great victories. Fizz slides me another glass with one of his tentacles. You sure you want to keep drinking, Zek? You've been going on about humans for 3 hours straight. 3 hours? Has it been that long? Time moves differently when you're contemplating the complete annihilation of everything you once believed in. See, 3 years ago I was somebody. I had medals, respect, a nice apartment on Galactic Central, and a pension plan that would have lasted me through my species' equivalent of retirement. Now I'm telling sob stories to anyone who'll listen in exchange for synthetic alcohol. The thing is, nobody believes me when I tell them how it really happened. They all think humanity won through superior tactics, advanced technology, or brilliant leadership. The truth is so much worse than that. The truth is that we got played by a species that was eating processed cheese and binge-watching something called Netflix while we were perfecting interstellar warfare. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, back when the galaxy made sense and humans were just another primitive species that might possibly join the galactic community in a few thousand years. Back when I thought the biggest threat to galactic peace was the ongoing trade dispute between the Zephyrians and the crystal beings. How wrong I was. Picture this, if you will. It's a Tuesday, Galactic Standard Time, and I'm sitting in the strategy room on Zephyrian Command Station Alpha, reviewing defensive positions for what we thought would be another boring patrol rotation. Admiral Praxtal, all 7 feet of blue-scaled arrogance, was briefing us on some primitive radio signals they'd detected from the outer rim. Gentlemen, Praxtal announced in that pompous tone of his, we have what appears to be first contact with a previously unknown species. Long-range scans indicate they've barely achieved faster-than-light travel. Their ships appear to be held together with some sort of adhesive tape. We all had a good laugh about that. Adhesive tape. Can you imagine? These creatures were using tape to hold their spacecraft together while we were flying vessels made from crystallized dark matter and quantum-bonded alloys. Then they showed up. I'll never forget my first glimpse of a human ship. It looked like someone had welded a bunch of metal containers together, painted them white, and stuck some engines on the back. There were actual windows cut into the hull, as if they needed to look outside to navigate. The entire bridge crew was visible through what appeared to be reinforced glass. But the real comedy started when they tried to communicate. Their lead ship transmitted a message that roughly translated to, "Greetings, we come in pieces." Now, any civilized species would recognize this as either a translation error or a cry for help. Admiral Praxtal, being the diplomatic genius he was, decided it was a declaration of war. They're threatening to come at us in pieces, he declared. Clearly, they're planning to attack us with debris or suicide vessels. I tried to point out that it was probably a translation error, but you know how Zephyrians are about their pride. Before I could finish my sentence, Praxtal was already preparing the fleet for combat. That's when Captain Buck Ramsey made his entrance. Buck was exactly what you'd expect from a human military leader if you'd been reading too much adventure fiction. Square jaw, perfect teeth, the kind of confidence that suggested he'd never met a problem he couldn't solve by hitting it harder. He appeared on our main view screen wearing what I later learned was called a leather jacket, chewing on some kind of plant matter. "Howdy, partners," Buck said, completely oblivious to the fact that he was addressing the most feared military commander in 3-star systems. "We're the Terran Diplomatic Corps, and we're here to make friends, share some beer, and maybe swap some stories about our respective home planets." Admiral Praxtal's scales literally changed color with rage. "You dare mock the Zephyrian Empire with your casual attitude and primitive attire?" Buck looked genuinely confused. "Mock? Buddy, I'm just trying to be friendly here. Although I gotta say, your whole blue-scaled space dragon thing is pretty intimidating." In a good way, he added quickly. And that's when it happened. The moment that doomed us all. Admiral Praxtal, in his infinite wisdom, decided to issue a formal challenge to single combat. In Zephyrian culture, this was supposed to be an honor reserved for worthy opponents. Buck was supposed to decline gracefully, acknowledging his inferiority. Instead, Buck grinned. "Well, if it's a fight you want, it's a fight you'll get," he said, cracking his knuckles in a way that somehow sounded threatening even through the comm system. "But I gotta warn you, pal. We humans have a saying back home. Don't start nothing, won't be nothing." The entire bridge went silent. Even the automated system seemed to pause in disbelief. Admiral Praxtal's expression shifted from rage to something I'd never seen before on a Zephyrian face. It might have been respect, or it might have been the dawning realization that he'd just challenged a species that apparently viewed interstellar warfare as a recreational activity. "Very well, human," Praxtal said slowly. "Let us see what your species is truly capable of." If I'd known then what I know now, I would have resigned my commission right there and moved to a nice, quiet mining colony in the Outer Rim. Instead, I stayed to watch the show. Big mistake. The first battle was supposed to be a demonstration. Admiral Praxtal assembled a task force of 12 heavy cruisers, each one carrying enough firepower to glass a small moon. The humans showed up with 5 ships that looked like they'd been assembled by enthusiastic amateurs in someone's backyard. I was monitoring the tactical display when Buck's voice crackled through the comm system. "Attention, Zephyrian fleet. This is your final warning. Stand down, or we'll be forced to show you why messing with Earth is bad for your health." Praxtal actually laughed. "Primitive mammals, you are outnumbered more than 2 to 1, and your vessels appear to be held together with hope and industrial adhesive. Surrender now, and we will grant you a swift death." "Industrial adhesive?" came a new voice from the human fleet. This one belonged to Dr. Emma Watts, their chief science officer, and she sounded genuinely offended. "I'll have you know that's military-grade duct tape, backed by 3 centuries of human engineering. It's probably more advanced than your quantum-bonded whatever it is." "Quantum-bonded dark matter alloys," I found myself saying into the comm. "Oh, fancy," Dr. Watts replied. "We call our stuff the gray stuff that fixes everything. Way more practical." That should have been our first clue. The battle began exactly as predicted. Praxtal's cruisers opened fire with their plasma cannons, energy beams that could punch through reinforced titanium like it was paper. The humans responded by doing absolutely nothing. For 30 seconds, we watched our weapons barrage harmlessly scatter against what appeared to be empty space around the human ships. Not shields, not armor, just empty space that somehow deflected our most advanced weaponry. "What in the name of the void is that?" Praxtal demanded. Dr. Watt's voice came back, cheerful as could be. "Oh, that's just some basic gravitational field manipulation. We figured out how to bend space-time around our ships. Pretty neat trick, right? We learned it from watching your old battles on the Galactic news networks. Gravitational field manipulation. They'd learned it from watching TV. But the real surprise came when the humans went on the offensive. Instead of using energy weapons like any civilized species, they launched what appeared to be metal projectiles. chunks of iron and steel fired from crude magnetic accelerators. "They're throwing rocks at us," someone on the bridge whispered. "Kinetic weapons," I corrected, though I was equally baffled. "But they shouldn't be effective against our armor." Except they were. Somehow, these primitive projectiles were punching through our quantum-bonded dark matter alloys like they were made of wet cardboard. Within minutes, 3 of our cruisers were venting atmosphere and calling for emergency evacuation. "How?" Praxtal demanded. "How are primitive kinetic weapons penetrating our defenses?" Buck's voice came back, and I swear I could hear him grinning through the comm system. "Well, partner, turns out your fancy space-age armor is real good at stopping energy weapons and other high-tech stuff, but nobody ever thought to test it against good old-fashioned chunks of metal moving really, really fast." That's when Sergeant Tank Morrison chimed in from one of the other human ships. Tank was Buck's demolitions expert, and his solution to every tactical problem apparently involved making things explode. "Plus, we loaded them with some special sauce," he added cheerfully. "Little bit of antimatter, little bit of compressed hydrogen, little bit of stuff we probably shouldn't tell you about. Makes for a real pretty fireworks show." The remaining Zephyrian cruisers lasted another 10 minutes. By the end of it, Admiral Praxtal was floating in an escape pod, staring at the wreckage of his supposedly invincible fleet, while the humans were already broadcasting surrender terms. Generous surrender terms, I might add. No occupation, no reparations, just a simple non-aggression pact and an exchange of cultural information. The kind of terms you offer to an equal, not a conquered enemy. That should have been our second clue. But the real kicker came 3 days later, when the Crystal Dominion decided to avenge their Zephyrian allies. The crystal beings of Nexus Prime were even more advanced than us, with ships that could phase in and out of normal space-time at will. They were untouchable, untrackable, and absolutely convinced of their own superiority. They lasted 40 minutes. Turns out, when your entire military strategy is based on being unpredictable and untouchable, you're not prepared for an enemy that's even more unpredictable than you are. The humans spent the entire battle doing things that made no tactical sense whatsoever, and somehow, that made perfect sense. When the crystal ships tried to phase out of normal space, the humans followed them. When they tried to use their reality-warping weapons, the humans countered with something Dr. Watts called localized physics denial fields. When they tried to retreat to regroup, they found human ships waiting for them in locations that should have been mathematically impossible to predict. By the end of that day, I was starting to suspect that everything I knew about warfare was completely wrong. The truth didn't come out until the Hive Confederacy fell. The Hive was our last hope, a collective intelligence spanning thousands of worlds with the most advanced strategic algorithms in known space. If anyone could figure out how to beat the humans, it would be them. I was part of the joint task force assembled to study human tactics, trying to find some weakness we could exploit. We'd been analyzing their battles for weeks, and nothing made sense. Their technology was inconsistent, their strategies seemed random, and their success rate was impossible. That's when Captain Buck Ramsey decided to pay us a visit. He showed up alone, in a single-person shuttle that looked like it had been built in someone's garage. No escort, no backup, no apparent concern for his own safety. He just docked with our command station and asked if anyone wanted to grab some coffee and chat. "The thing is, folks," Buck said, settling into a chair that creaked ominously under his weight, "we figured we owed you an explanation. See, we haven't exactly been playing fair." Admiral Quixneth, the Hive's primary strategic node, buzzed with confusion. "Define not playing fair, human." Buck grinned that infuriating grin of his. "Well, for starters, we've been deliberately making our ships look crappy. All that duct tape and those welded-together hulls? That's just window dressing. Our real ships are parked in a parallel dimension about 3 feet to the left of where you think they are." The silence in the room was deafening. "You see, Doctor," Watts added, materializing from what I had thought was empty air, We've been studying your military tactics for about 60 years now. Ever since we figured out how to intercept your communication networks. Turns out, when you're broadcasting your battle strategies across half the galaxy, it's pretty easy for someone to learn your playbook. 60 years. They'd been watching us, learning from us, preparing for this moment for 60 years while we thought they were still banging rocks together. But the real genius, Buck continued, was making you think we were primitive. See, every military strategist in the galaxy has been trained to fight against advanced opponents. You know how to counter energy shields, quantum weaponry, and exotic matter manipulation. But nobody ever thought to defend against good old-fashioned human ingenuity. Tank Morrison chose that moment to decloak right behind Admiral Quicksneth, causing the hive entity to emit what I can only describe as a surprised beep. Plus, Tank added cheerfully, turns out when your whole battle strategy is based on being logical and predictable, fighting someone who makes absolutely no sense is a real problem. That's when Dr. Watts dropped the real bombshell. Oh, and one more thing. Remember those kinetic weapons that worked so well against your armor? We actually invented plasma cannons about 20 years ago, and energy shields, and quantum torpedoes, and reality displacement bombs. We just thought kinetic weapons would be more fun. She pulled out a device that looked like a handheld communicator and pressed a button. Suddenly, the space around our command station was filled with human ships. Not the cobbled-together rust buckets we'd been fighting, but sleek, advanced vessels that made our most advanced cruisers look like antiques. We called this our actual fleet, Buck said casually. Pretty nice, right? Took us about 15 years to build once we figured out how to synthesize dark matter in our kitchen sinks. Kitchen sinks. They were synthesizing dark matter in kitchen sinks. The funny thing is, Dr. Watts continued, we were originally planning to just make contact, share some technology, maybe set up some trade agreements. But then you guys immediately assumed we were either primitive or hostile. So we figured we'd play along. See how long it took you to figure out that the species that invented nuclear weapons as a way to end a war might be a little more dangerous than they look. Admiral Quicksneth's buzzing had shifted to what I recognized as the hive equivalent of existential despair. You have been deliberately appearing weaker than you are. This is psychological warfare. Bingo, Buck said, pointing at the hive entity with obvious approval. See, that's why we like you guys. You catch on quick. Tank leaned back in his chair, which I now realized was probably made from some advanced human material that could support any weight. Plus, it was hilarious. You should have seen the look on Praxtal's face when he realized he'd been beaten by duct tape and determination. And that's when I realized the horrible truth. Humanity hadn't conquered the galaxy through superior technology or brilliant tactics. They'd done it by convincing us to underestimate them, then making us defeat ourselves with our own arrogance and preconceptions. We'd been played by a species that considered interstellar warfare a form of entertainment. What followed was less a war and more a series of increasingly embarrassing surrenders. Once word got out about humanity's real capabilities, most species didn't even bother fighting. The smart ones surrendered immediately and asked for integration into what Buck was calling the Terran Friendship Coalition. The stubborn ones got to experience human creativity firsthand. The crystalline hegemony thought they were clever, hiding their fleet in a pocket dimension that existed outside normal space-time. The humans found them anyway, using something Dr. Watts called interdimensional sonar, which apparently worked by playing Earth music at frequencies that resonated with reality itself. Tank insisted on using a genre called death metal for the operation, because of course he did. The Voidwalkers tried to flee to the edge of the galaxy, figuring humans couldn't possibly have the technology to follow them into the space between spaces. They were wrong. Humanity had apparently been using the void as a shortcut for decades, and had already set up what Buck cheerfully called interdimensional truck stops throughout the emptiness between realities. But my personal favorite was what happened to the Temporal Syndicate. These guys were time travelers, the most advanced species in galactic history. with the ability to erase their enemies from existence by preventing their evolution millions of years ago. They took one look at humanity's rapid expansion and decided to nip the problem in the bud by going back and destroying Earth during its primordial phase. They never came back. According to Buck, humanity had been expecting that particular strategy for about a century and had prepared accordingly. Time travel's tricky, he explained to those of us who were still paying attention to the tactical briefings. But it turns out, when you've got a species that's really, really good at making friends, you can convince your past selves to help you out. Apparently, the Temporal Syndicate had arrived in Earth's past to find it already defended by humans from 17 different possible futures, all of whom had been expecting them. The time travelers were currently being held in what Dr. Watts described as temporal detention, which sounded both advanced and terrifying. Tank's contribution to the time travel discussion was typically direct, plus we booby-trapped our own timeline. Anyone tries to mess with our history, they get a face full of chronologically displaced antimatter. We call it the Back to the Future Protocol. The speed of humanity's conquest was breathtaking. Within 6 months, every major power in the galaxy had either surrendered or been absorbed into the Terran Friendship Coalition. Within a year, human administrative centers were operating on every inhabited world, staffed by cheerful humans who seemed genuinely excited to be there. That's where my story gets personal. I was commanding the last independent task force in the galaxy, a ragtag collection of ships from a dozen different species, all of us too proud or too stupid to surrender. We'd been conducting hit-and-run attacks on human supply lines, thinking we could maybe wear them down through attrition. We lasted 3 days. The end came when we tried to ambush a human convoy in the Meridian Nebula. We'd spent weeks planning the operation, analyzing their patrol routes, calculating the perfect moment to strike. We thought we had them dead to rights. Instead, we jumped out of hyperspace to find Captain Buck Ramsey waiting for us with a single ship and a thermos of what he claimed was coffee. "Howdy, Zek," he said, as if we were old friends meeting for lunch instead of mortal enemies in the middle of a war zone. "Figured you'd show up here eventually. You want to chat about surrender terms, or should we skip straight to the part where you realize you're outgunned, outmaneuvered, and out of options?" That's when I realized he'd been tracking us for weeks, letting us think we were operating independently while he watched our every move. The ambush we thought we were setting was actually the trap we'd walked into. "How?" I asked, because at that point I just had to know. Buck's grin was almost sympathetic. "Well, partner, turns out when you've got a species that invented reality TV, surveillance is basically a hobby. We've been watching you guys since you started your little resistance movement. Heck, Tank's been taking bets on how long you'd last." Tank's voice crackled through the comm from somewhere nearby. "You made it longer than expected, Zek. I owe Emma 20 credits." And that was it. The last battle of the Galactic War, and I lost it to a human with a thermos and a sense of humor. So here I am, 3 years later, telling this story to anyone who'll listen in a dive bar on the edge of nowhere. The Terran Friendship Coalition runs the galaxy now, and I have to admit, they're not terrible at it. Crime is down, trade is up, and somehow they've managed to get 17 different species to agree on a universal currency. You know what the worst part is? I tell Fizz, draining what's left of my quantum whiskey. They're actually good at this ruling thing. Fair laws, efficient bureaucracy, excellent customer service. It's like being conquered by the galaxy's most competent insurance company. Fizz makes that burbling sound that passes for laughter in his species. Could be worse, Zek. At least they let you keep your dignity. Dignity? I laugh bitterly. Fizz, I got beaten by a species that considers professional wrestling a legitimate form of entertainment. There's no dignity left. That's when the bar door opens and Captain Buck Ramsey walks in, looking exactly the same as he did 3 years ago, still wearing that leather jacket, still chewing on whatever plant matter humans consume. still radiating the kind of confidence that makes you want to either follow him into battle or punch him in his perfect teeth. Zek, he calls out cheerfully, sliding into the booth across from me. How's retirement treating you, buddy? About as well as you'd expect, I mutter. What do you want, Buck? Nothing much. Just thought I'd stop by and see how you were doing. We miss having you around, you know. You were one of the better strategic minds we faced. Flattery will get you nowhere, human. Buck signals Fizz for a drink, something called beer that apparently tastes terrible but somehow helps humans think better. Actually, I wanted to offer you a job. I nearly choke on my whiskey. A job? With the Terran Friendship Coalition? Why not? You know our tactics better than most of our own people at this point. Plus, we're expanding into the Andromeda Galaxy next year, and we could use someone with your experience to help make first contact go smoothly. You're invading another galaxy? Invading is such an ugly word, Buck says, accepting his beer from Fizz with a nod of thanks. We prefer aggressive friendship initiatives. And before you ask, no, we haven't been watching them for 60 years. We only started monitoring their communications about 10 years ago. I stare at him for a long moment, trying to decide if he's serious. You want me to help you conquer Andromeda? I want you to help us make friends with Andromeda. Big difference. And you know what? I'm actually considering it. Because if there's one thing I've learned from watching humanity steamroll the galaxy, it's that you're better off on their side than in their way. I'll think about it, I tell him finally. Buck grins and raises his beer in a mock toast. That's all I can ask for, partner. He finishes his drink, leaves some human currency on the table, and heads for the door. Just before he leaves, he turns back with that infuriating smile of his. Oh, and Zek, you might want to ask Fizz about his real name sometime. I think you'd find it interesting. After Buck leaves, I turn to look at the bartender who's been listening to my sob story for months. Fizz is wiping down glasses with one tentacle, but something about his posture seems different now. More familiar. Fizz, I say slowly, what's your real name? The blob-like creature pauses in his cleaning and makes a sound I've never heard before. It takes me a moment to realize he's laughing. Actually, he says in perfect, unaccented Galactic standard, it's Frank. Frank Martinez, Terran Diplomatic Corps, Advanced Cultural Integration Division. I stare at him for a long moment as the implications sink in. You're human. Guilty as charged, Frank says, and suddenly his blob-like form is shifting, revealing the holographic projector underneath. Within seconds, I'm looking at a perfectly ordinary human male with dark hair and an apologetic smile. Sorry about the deception, but orders are orders. Plus, you tell a hell of a story when you think no one important is listening. How long? I ask weakly. How long have I been Frank? About 40 years now. How long have I been monitoring your activities? Since about a week after you started coming in here. The Coalition likes to keep tabs on former enemy commanders, just in case. I slump back in my booth, feeling the last of my dignity evaporate into the recycled air. So you've been reporting everything I've said to your superiors. Oh, absolutely, Frank says cheerfully. But don't worry about it too much. Buck really was impressed by your tactical analysis. Half the improvements to our military doctrine came from listening to you complain about how we beat you. And that's when it hits me. The final, ultimate humiliation. Not only did humanity conquer the galaxy, not only did they do it while making us look like fools, but they've been using my own bitter analysis of their victories to make themselves even more effective. I've been helping them conquer Andromeda without even knowing it. You know what, Frank? I say, raising my empty glass in a toast to my own spectacular failure. Sign me up for Buck's job offer. If I'm going to help humanity take over the universe, I might as well get paid for it. Frank grins and pours me another quantum whiskey. Welcome to the Terran Friendship Coalition, Zek. I think you're going to like it here. And you know what? He's probably right. Because if there's one thing humanity has taught us, it's that sometimes the best way to deal with an impossible situation is to laugh at it and move on. Even if that situation happens to be your own complete and utter defeat at the hands of a species that thinks duct tape is a legitimate construction material. At least the benefits package is good.